Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Ryan with another HM1 in 2021. Today we're going to be going over OPNAV instruction 5100.19 Foxtrot. So there's about 4 or 5 different chapters on the HM1 bib. I'm going to do one video at a time, just because in the future, the bib changes, sometimes the chapters change. So in case I'm not making it in March, I don't want to have one video with the 4 wrong chapters. So I'm going to make one chapter at a time, so then in the future I can maybe move the videos out of this file that are no longer on the bib and add the new ones, so I'm not starting back from scratch. So today we're going to start with chapter B4. Let me scroll down to the chapters. Let's see, chapter B4, where are you at? So chapter B4, Noise Abatement and Hearing Conservation. So again, if the test question is, what is chapter 4 of the OPNAV instruction 5100.19 Foxtrot? The answer is noise abatement and hearing conservation. Let's go ahead and roll down to that. B1, B2, B3. So as I said with like one of the other instructions, like I think the one that was only chapter 10, it's really important to read the bib to find out which chapters you need to do or need to read. I mean, realistically, all this information is pretty cool to know, but there's already a bunch of knowledge you have to know, so try to make it as efficient as possible so you're only really studying the chapters that are in the test. Really focus fire your efforts. Yeah, it'd be cool to be able to remember this whole 500-page document, but let's be honest, it's advancement time, so I'm just studying the 4 chapters that I have to for now. So I said earlier, so chapter 4 of the 5100.19 Foxtrot is the Noise Abatement and Hearing Conservation Program. So boom, under A, right there, it lets you know what the goal is for the program. So reduce excessive noise, prevent noise-induced hearing loss, and to assure auditory readiness of all Navy personnel. So the whole point of noise abatement is to protect people. It does say that the primary means of accomplishing it is the application of engineering controls. So not your PPE, not your hearing protection, specific engineering controls is the primary means of noise reduction. And noise reduction, noise-induced hearing loss, is the fleet's #1 occupational health hazard. So I said it before with another instruction, whenever something asks you what's the most common, what's the #1, what's the most important, what's the most commonly used, is usually a test question. So there you go right there. So what's the fleet's #1 occupational health hazard? Noise-induced hearing loss. So pretty cut and dry. So as of every instruction, even in the different chapters of the big instruction, there are subcategories of responsibility for each member. So for the CO, they need to make sure that the health conservation program is established and maintained with the command. So CO's job is to make sure we have one. They need to make sure that there is a readily accessible supply of hearing protection, so HPD. That acronym shows up a lot. I had to read through it a couple times before I realized that HPD was hearing protection, which it defines as disposable earplugs, noise muffs, or both. So CO's job is to make sure the supply people are ordering enough. Kind of hard to protect people's ears when we're out of ear pro. So excuse the flipping you may hear in the background. I have the printed copy in front of me while I'm also going over the website. I like to keep printed copies of all instructions because it's easier for me to make notes, highlight. Honestly, I don't think I ever reread my notes. Maybe that's why I'm still taking the test. But for me, writing down the notes helps a lot. So safety officer, they need to request assistance from an industrial hygienist or occupational audiologist. So they're the ones that put out the order for the IH or the occupational audiologist person to check out. They also maintain the record of the noise hazardous area of equipment, which makes sense. Safety should have a log of all the noise area. They need to make sure that the HPD, they need to make sure that the hearing protection is available in anywhere that's noisy. And safety needs to make sure that the program is evaluated annually. Let's see. So I had it here. PTS was something I was looking for early in the instruction. I think I missed it right here. So permanent threshold shift. PTS. That comes up a little bit later in the instruction. So remember, permanent threshold shift, PTS. So IHA is Afloat, so they make sure that all this stuff is calibrated, and they annually certify audiometric testing booths. I noticed that almost all the timelines in this instruction were annually. So almost training, certification, baseline stuff, almost everything was annually. Divos. Again, make sure people are wearing their Hear Pro, their hearing protection. So I could have it mandated all day long, but it's really the Divo that's making sure people are physically wearing it. Here are the shifts. I'm probably going to type these up in the description for the video at the end, because I think the numbers are super important. So significant threshold shift is basically meaning the change in your audiogram. And here's how it's defined. Let's see. Alright, that's actually the STS gets defined a little bit later. But noise areas, so specific noise areas are defined as people or areas that are 80 decibels or higher, or 140 decibel sound pressure level peak. How I read that is if it's continuous 80, but no one sound should ever be greater than 140. And before you do your audiogram, you need to make sure that you're not in any of those areas for at least 14 hours before a retest. So for me, 14 hours is one of those really random hours that I don't think I've ever seen on another instruction. Normally the Navy's pretty simple, like 1 week, 24 hours, a month, 90 days. Like normally they're pretty round hour day amount. 14 hours to me is really unique, so I think that's going to help me remember it. So 14 hours, they need to stay away from areas that are considered noise, which is anything that has higher than 80 decibels or 140 peak sound level. Hearing protection cannot be used to meet that requirement, which makes sense. So like if your hearing protection was faulty or jacked up, yeah, you could be in the hazardous area, but if you're not wearing your ear pro right, you might as well have just not been in there, because you're just going to get exposed to that. And if seeing how people wear their masks behind closed doors when there's not a lot of people around, I could probably guarantee you people probably don't wear your ear pro like they should either. Let's see. Noise exclusion must not be imposed for individuals scheduled for an annual audiogram. So not for the annual ones, only for the retests. Let's see. Medical department rep. They need to coordinate with DIVOs to identify and maintain a current roster of personnel. So just as safety has that roster of dangerous areas, medical department has a list of all the people who are on the health protection conservation. Wow. Hearing conservation program. There we go. Took a few times. They also need to conduct and document training for all hands and look annually. So when is hearing protection training done? During INDOC and every year after that. Let's see. Consult with the pros if they need it. Schedule personnel for annual audiometric testing. So look, there again, annual. So hearing conservation program, people get rescreened annually for that. See, here we go. There's the significant threshold sound, or let's look up STS again. Significant threshold shift. So significant threshold shift. So anyone that has a worsening STS on an annual need to be excluded from the noise areas. And there's the exact same number again. So if I was to say if it shows up several times on an instruction, probably important to know. So what's a noise area? 80 decibels or higher for continuous, or 140 decibels for peak for 14 hours. Keep that person away from there before the retest. Let's see. So audiometric booths, so sound booths are certified annually. Same with audiometers. So my big note I had was what's an STS, because I've seen it so many times. But now that I've reviewed it with you guys and read it out, it's significant threshold shift. All right, now this is what everybody is responsible for. So we're still on responsibilities, but now this is a responsibility of all hands. So comply with hazardous warning labels. Duh. If you see a sign, follow it. A lot of this stuff is pretty obvious, like such as properly wear your hearing pro, undergo your follow-up. So medical, I mean, as corpsman, you should probably do your follow-ups. Annual noise abatement. So make sure that the noise stuff is where it says it should be. This is one that I was surprised by, but after thinking about it, it makes sense. So no portable electronic listening devices such as music and media when you're in an industrial work area. So it makes sense to me. If you're already in a noisy area, probably a bad idea to keep adding noise. So do not do that. All right. Noise measurement exposure assessment. So we're out of responsibilities. So it's hard to control the noise if it's not measured. So it says in here it's necessary to be able to measure the noise. See, I don't see any specific stuff there. It's probably a different chapter. So it does specify, so here's another one. For new construction ships, the noise survey done by the contractor is not acceptable for the required noise survey. Especially like how I read that, that's because when the ship leaves, they add a bunch of military stuff to it, and it's hard to account for the noise until I have all the factors that may make the noise. So the noise survey needs to happen when the ship is out doing its thing and is not fresh out of the shipyard. So it's got to be full. Let's see. Actually, let me zoom this in a little bit more. It's kind of hard for me to read the instruction as I'm going through. Yep, too much. Let's make this a little... yep, too much. Yep, too much. Okay, I guess we're stuck with it. Noise measurements. Yep, I'm probably going to have to slice this out. So number 3, noise measurement and exposure. Talked about that. So for the ship, boom. It doesn't count if it's been done by them. Personnel must be entered into the hearing conservation program when they are routinely exposed in an occupational environment. So this is what defines what is considered an environment where someone needs to go in the HCP. So again, look at that. This one's a little bit higher than the 80. So for an 8-hour time window, average noise of 85 decibels. Or again, here's the 140 again. So 85 or 140 pulse. So continuous 85 decibels over that 8-hour time period, or 140 pulse at any given one time. Here's how you measure some of your noise. So certified who can do it. Kind of makes sense. Trained people, IHs, occupational audiologists, or anyone else that's trained. So all personnel exposed to that 8-hour window of 85 decibels must be notified of the results of the monitoring. So you got to tell people the results, especially if it's been that 85 exposure. Just make sure their hearing's not jacked up, and how can they get checked out. Exposure assessment. So here's what, again, here's the 85. Just said that. And 140. Let's see. So work environments found to have noise levels equal to greater than 85 decibels or 140 decibels for impact or pulse noise must be analyzed. And then again, survey within 30 days. So if you're in that group where you have the 85 or 140, you got to get reassessed in 30 days just to see how your hearing's doing. And there's a little bit more stuff that based how you're going to get put in the health conservation program. The big one here is equal to or exceeding 85 decibels or 140 spike. So man, that 85 and 140 shows up a lot. So it probably means it's important. Because to me, like whenever I look for instructions, I try to look for what's repeated multiple times. Because I think the people that make the tests understand that we don't have that photographic memory. It takes a lot of studying. But if I can ask you one question about something that's repeated 20 times, like in a 10-page instruction, it's probably important that you should know that, or else why would it be, repeated so many times? So let's look at noise abatement. So as I said earlier in the first part of the instruction, engineering controls are number 1. So before we look at anything else, we look at how can we do engineering stuff to reduce the volume. And the engineering noise abatement normally happens like construction, equipment design. So it's something they try to do before you're underway, because they try to make sure people are safe before we put them on the ship. That's really all that's there. Let's see. Yeah, so primary engineering control. Secondary is administrative control, which is like PPE and all that. So number 5, identify and labeling. So if I'm in an area that is, oh look, 85, it needs to be labeled as noise hazardous. But there's actually 2 different thresholds for what dangerous could be. So again, I think this is important to know, and I'm going to put it in my summary when I post the video. So 85, between 85 and 96, or I guess 95 technically, because 96 is the threshold for the next one. So 85 to 95, 140 to 164. I'm getting that number because I'm taking this max minus 1 because it needs to be less than that. Must be labeled as noise hazardous and required single hearing protection. So you're 85 and 140, you need single hearing protection. However, if it gets to the point where it's 96 or 165, you need your double hearing pro. So look at that, it's 11 more, 15 more, double pro. So just try to remember 85 to 96, 140 to 165 is where you got to put on that double. So everything needs to be labeled. So if it's 95 or 85 decibels or greater, it needs to be labeled. Only really exception is if the entire area is hazardous and the equipment is stationary, so it's not going to be moving. So if you're in an area where everything is hazardous sound, it's not nearly as important to have like one individual thing, because like it's the cumulative sounds of everything in that room. As with every instruction, it's important to know your forms. There's only 2 forms in this chapter of the instruction. So NAVMED 6260/2, hazardous noise warning decal. NAVMED 6260/2A, hazardous noise labels where double. I think this one could be maybe easy to understand because they're both the same, but the double, you add an alpha at the end of it. So 6260/2 is your hazardous noise warning label. 6260/2A is where double. Doesn't give any specific sizes of the signs or labels or anything, but since it's a Navy form, I assume it only comes in one way. Let's see, that stuff's kind of obvious. So hearing protection devices, so that's your HPD. So hearing protection is considered an interim protection measure while doing the engineering controls. So generally, again, engineering control number 1, anything else number 2. Here again, look at that rephrase of the single HPDs. So 85 or greater, but less than 96. Greater than 140, but less than 165. And then double HPDs needs to be worn when the noise is at 96 or greater than or equal to 165. So weapons fire, anything like that. And it also has a caveat that commanders will dictate the use of hearing protection in combat based on mission requirements. So if in an area where, yeah, even though it's technically over, but operationally we need to be able to hear, they could say, nope, you're only doing single pro. Custom earplugs, you can get them, but it has to be cleared by an ear provider. And medical personnel must examine the fit before you can do it. But that examination must happen at least annually. I've never been on a ship, so I can't really speak to what this looks like operationally. But to me, it sounds like when they're doing everything else for the ear check-in, they also take a look at the earplugs. Let's see. So only people that are authorized to look at earplugs can fit and issue them. There's again, this falls under the public health bib. Occupational health does anyways. So because of that, Navy Marine Corps Public Health Center website gives the guidance for Hearing Pro stuff. Hearing aids can't be used with Hear Pro unless an audiologist or an OT verifies that. And then we got some more forms. So the DD Form 215 reference audiogram. I think I've studied that so many times versus like the different references it shows up. The DD 215 is just stuck in my head, but something to think of. And also, where do the test results go? That DOEHRS TAC HC. I don't know what that is, but the Dorsic sounds like a cool thing to say. That's where the audiology stuff goes uploaded. So not Alta, not Accentrus, not CHCS, Dorsic. I'm going to say that a bunch of times. I have no idea how that's supposed to be pronounced. Monitoring audiogram. Hey, look, as I said earlier, most things in instruction are annually. So if I was to guess, and I honestly don't remember, if anything here, like hearing conservation shows up on the exam, I'm going to put annually, unless I have a really convincing reason to think anything but. So the annual audiogram begins within 1 year of assignment to the duties. Test results go into that. And then there's the DD216, which is the hearing conservation data. So boom, that's the other form. So DD215 is your baseline audiogram. DD216 is your hearing conservation data, which from what I understand is basically any of the updated audiograms. Termination, because civilians are people, enlisted or not. Civilians get a test when they are removed from the HCP. Active duty only get it upon retirement or separation. Let's see. So, medical provider is the one that says if other hearing tests need to happen. And those go on your SF600, which again, hopefully at this point you've seen the 600 many, many times. To me, the 600 is kind of the catch-all form, and I don't know what else to put. Clinical notation on the SF600, chronological record of medical care, and also maintain the health record. And then if that extra test is in the Dorsic thing, it will be recorded as a non-hearing conservation test. So anything that is other is not part of the HCP. Training, all this stuff is kind of obvious. Know why you're wearing it, how to notice if somewhere is dangerous, why it's important, any off-duty hearing health hazards. A lot of that stuff's kind of obvious. So here we go, annual refresher training. There's annual again. I think actually every time on instruction is annual. Annual, 14 hours. So record keeping, medical department maintains a current roster of personnel who work in noise hazardous areas. So how I saw that breakdown of like who has the rosters, safety has the roster of the areas that are dangerous, but medical has the rosters of who works in those dangerous areas. Let's see, Dorsic is permanent. And now let's look at the appendix. So some of the stuff I vaguely remember seeing on like Blue Jacketeer. I can't for the life of me remember if I've seen it on the exam, but what I've seen doesn't really matter because the exam can change. So let's take a look at this appendix. So the big ones, what are the test frequencies of your audiogram? 500, 1000, 2000, 3000, 4000, 6000 hertz. Only people certified can take the test. Again, annual certified of the audiometric booth. Let's see, reference baseline audiograms. All personnel included in the healthcare or hearing conservation program must have the DD215, the reference audiogram. That makes sense. So if you're in a program where they're assessing your hearing, it's probably a good idea to have a baseline on file. Otherwise, how do you know if something's jacked up or not? There's that 14 hours again. So all reference audiograms must have the 14 hours to workplace noise exceeding 80. So remember that normally it's 85 on up. However, when it's before your audiogram, it needs to be 80, not 85. And the 85 may not be met, or the 80 may not be met by wearing your hearing protection. And you can't go to a hazardous duty in a designated noise area until you've had that reference audiogram. I see as a military CYA, we got to prove that we're the ones that didn't jack up your hearing. So annually, again, all personnel in the HCP must receive a monitoring audiogram annually. And additional ones can happen when there's individual complaints of hearing difficulties, but that is the discretion of the audiologist and the MO. Let's see. Here we go. Here's how we identify that significant threshold shift. So a change in hearing of 10 decibels at the 2000, 3000, and 4000 in either ear. So 2, 3, 4, 10. If there's no big change, they do their other hearing at a year. So again, 1 year. And then again, additional monitoring needs to happen if they do notice that significant threshold shift, because let's double check it. So, and then if there's improved hearing, retest immediately to find out what was going on if the test was invalid. If the repeat audiogram continues to show the negative threshold. So this one's weird. The STS, a negative STS, means your hearing improved. A positive STS means it got worse. So just kind of think like the flip on the converse there. So if someone has the plus or minus 5 decibel, have them come back in a year. Let's see. If there's deteriorated hearing, that's when they come back 14 hours later in the under 80 area. Let's see. And that the physical exclusion area, so that 14 hours is called your auditory rest. It also has a couple follow-ups. So if someone's hearing got deteriorated, they have to follow up on them. So first follow-up, they need to have their Hearing Pro refitted, make sure they're using it, get back to work, see you in a year. And if that supports it, first check the mechanical base for the ship, because as we said, engineering controls are number 1. Then there's some hearing stuff that they do to double check that. There's another follow-up, so again, refit, retrain, look for another shift. And then here's some numbers. So any individual who has hearing loss in both ears, in which the sum of the thresholds of frequency of 3, 4, and 6 equals 270, let's see, will not be assigned duties. So if your hearing gets jacked up to about 270 change in those 3 different frequencies, you're donezo. You're not able to work in hazardous noise. And again, when you're removed from the HCP, there is an audiogram that occurs, and that's going to be rewarded on the 2216. But active duty, they only get it on termination, military separation, or retirement. And boom, that was a long video, but that was chapter B4, hearing conservation. I'm probably going to read this a few more times because I think this is the most I've ever stuttered while reading through an instruction. So it's definitely something that I need to focus a lot more on, and I hope you guys do too. Because I've noticed PrevMed I consistently score the worst on. So this is one I'm going to check out, keep in the back pocket. My next 3 videos will be the other chapters on the 5100.19. Alright, have a good night.